15 minutes a day, and then it's half an hour a day, and then it's an hour a day, and then it's 4 hours a day. And maybe if you're extraordinarily careful, then you get to a point where you're like that a good proportion of the time. Because straight is the gate and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. Beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Well, that's particularly good advice for today's political situation, I can tell you. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. Well, that's what I learned from studying the history of totalitarianism in the 20th century, is that a corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit. And that's for sure. And it's so funny, you know, people who think, when they're thinking about their relationship with divinity or their relationship with God, they think it's a primitive and childish way of thinking. What if a miracle just manifests? Why can't a miracle just manifest itself? And I would be convinced. And the funny thing is first of all, actually you wouldn't be. If a miracle actually happened, you would actually forget about it in about 6 months. I mean, you'd think that's not true, but it's true. You would actually forget about it because that's what people are like. But there are negative miracles that are happening all the time, which actually lends some credence to my supposition, and we don't pay any attention to that. If we can't learn from what happened in the 20th century, then we are absolutely incapable of learning. Because what happened in the 20th century was as bitter a set of lessons as you could possibly imagine. And it's associated precisely with this. A corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit. Neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Well, that's a flood motif right there. It's like we're constantly the archetype of the tree. That's the archetype of being. It's the archetype of the self often. What's the warning here? It's that if you're mostly dead wood, you're going to burn up. And you can think about that metaphysically. You can project that into eternity, and you can think about that as a form of hell. And the funny thing is that when that's happening to you in real time, it is like an eternity in hell. It's a perfectly reasonable way of thinking about it. But you can strip the metaphysical elements off, and you can say, well, if you're mostly dead wood, then a spark will light you on fire. And that's also very much worth thinking about. Wherefore by their fruits shall ye know them. Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father, which is in heaven. That's an interesting line, I think. I mean, one of the proper critiques of traditional Christianity, maybe this is the sort of critique that Nietzsche put forth, was that Christianity had degenerated in its moral mission. Jung was a little bit more sympathetic, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but Nietzsche's idea was that Christianity had lost its way when it generated the presupposition that humanity was saved in some final sense by the sacrifice of Christ. It meant that the work was already done, and I'm being harsh in my judgment for the purpose of rhetorical simplification, but the idea was that if you just professed faith that had already occurred, then you were granted eternal salvation. It's like, well, it's not so straightforward, and I think that's what this line actually represents. It says, how do you enter into the kingdom of heaven? And again, you can think about that under the aspect of eternity, or you can think about it as a psychological statement, and the answer is quite straightforward, is that you do what Noah did to make him immune from the flood, and that's to walk with God. And that's what this sermon is about. It's laying out the practical elements of that, and the practical elements are aim at the highest possible good and play that out in the world, and then you may have the opportunity to inhabit the highest possible good that you're positing into existence. Perhaps not, But you can't think of any more practical way of going about that. I mean, if you build a house, then maybe you can live in it. If you don't build a house, you're not going to be able to live in it. If you build a good house, then you'll be able to live in a good house. And if you build a perfect house, then maybe you can live in a perfect house. But if you just say that the house has already been built for you, and that you can just say that the house is being built for you, well then the probability that you're going to be able to live where you need to live is, there's no probability that you're going to be able to live where you need to live. Many will say to me in that day, that's the judgment day, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works. And then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you that work iniquity. See, that's judgment day, you know. That's an archetypal idea. And partly it's archetypal because every day is judgment day. And the part of you that's equivalent to the logos, say, the part of you that's your own ideal, sits in eternal judgment on your iniquity. And that's the source of guilt and shame and withdrawal, and then resentment, and then murderousness, and then genocide. It's because you can intuit the ideal, and the problem with intuiting the ideal is that an ideal is always a judge. There's no difference between an ideal and a judge, and so you're eternally judged by your own ideal. If you have no ideal, well then you've got no direction and no meaning in your life. And then of course the more extreme the ideal, the harsher the judge. That's actually why Jung was very curious about why the book of Revelation was tacked on to the Bible, because the book of Revelation, that's a very weird book. And you know, in the Gospels, Christ is, I would say, perhaps primarily merciful. There's maybe a war in his character between truth and mercy, but it's one of the two, perhaps mercy. And Jung's observation was the gospel Christ was too merciful. And that's why the book of Revelation was tacked on to the New Testament, because in the book of Revelation, Christ, who's the ideal, who's above the pyramid, right, the transcendent ideal, is nothing but a judge, and everyone fails. And of course, the ultimate ideal is the ultimate judge. And so that's the archetypal reality there. And you can say, well, I don't want to be judged, and so I'll dispense with the ideal. But then you're Cain, because Cain is exactly the person who dispenses with the ideal. And so there's no escaping from it. There's no escaping from eternal judgment. That's the archetypal story. You know, people put a lot of work into these representations, you know, and there's thousands of them. They weren't messing around. These are serious pieces of work. You know, we don't understand them, but that doesn't mean that the people who created them didn't know what they were doing. These were geniuses who created these pieces of work. It's not like they understood in an articulated manner exactly what they were trying to represent. But what they were representing were the metaphors at the core of our culture. To the degree that our culture is functional and good, these are the metaphors upon which it's founded. And they're not for the faint of heart, you know. You say religion is the opiate of the masses. It's like, yeah, then how do you explain this? Exactly. You know, because if it was opiates you're after, you might just get rid of that panel. Especially when the other thing that's so interesting about the proposition, if you look at Revelations and in Revelation and you look at the judgment, almost everyone ends up on the right side of this panel. So if you were just conjuring up some sort of pathetic wish fulfillment, why in the world would you tilt the scales in that manner? You think that's supposed to make people feel good? I don't think so. There's almost nothing about this picture that should make people feel good. It should, if you understand it properly, it should terrify you to the depths of your soul. That's what the picture is for. Therefore, whoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the winds blew, and the floods came and beat upon the house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. And everyone that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not shall be likened unto a foolish man which built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it... Oh, I made a mistake. And it fell, for it was founded upon sand. And it came to pass, this is a very interesting line. I really, you know, now and then you run across lines this particularly happens in biblical settings. You run across lines that you cannot believe actually exist. You cannot imagine how someone could have imagined up and conjured up the line. And these two lines are like that as far as I'm concerned. And it came to pass when Jesus had ended these sayings that people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. And that's something so interesting, you know, because that was another thing that I didn't really appreciate about the churches that I attended to, and that would be that the lessons were taught by scribes and the words were mouthed, but there was no power in them. There was no meaning in them. It was as if, well, it was like when I was 20 years old and I was saying all these things I didn't mean. You know, they were words that sounded good. They were like gilded cloth, I suppose, that you can wrap around yourself, but there's no substance to them. And there's a big difference between listening to something that has substance and listening to something that is spoken because it sounds like it should sound good. And this line says that whoever spoke the lines that we just described was someone who sounded like he knew what he was talking about, and not someone who was just repeating something for the sake of sounding good. And it certainly seems to me that the lines that we just reviewed have the awesome impact of authority. Back to Noah. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was full of violence, filled with violence. Any of you see the new NRA ad? You might want to look that up. I would say that's the most shocking manifestation of political polarization in the United States that I've yet seen. Most of it I've seen on the left, right? What shocked me mostly has been on the left. But the new NRA ad, that's a whole new thing. So it's this attractive woman doing a voiceover. She kind of looks like Demi Moore, although she's kind of tough looking. I guess Demi Moore could look tough now and then. And she has contempt on her face. And that's a dangerous thing. And in the background, there's nothing but images of Antifa riots and Berkeley riots and fire and protest. And she's describing that as a conspiracy, essentially, a conspiracy that involves the intellectual elite, including Hollywood, which is named by name. The accusation is that there's a cabal of corrupt intellectuals, let's say, who are bringing the country to its knees, and that it's time to get your goddamn guns. And so look up the ad and see what you think, because there's lots of people who would be perfectly happy if that was the direction in which we were headed. And one of the things that I'm hoping is that we might be able to talk our way through it. But we're in a situation where every act of individual idiocy will push us one iota closer to the brink. And that'll make the 15% of the population or 30% of the population who would love to see everything degenerate into chaos perfectly happy, because that's their aim. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh is corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood, rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make of it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above. And the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee I will establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife and thy sons' wives with thee. That's a fairly optimistic twist on the story, because not only is it Noah, but he gets to save his whole family and down a couple of generations. And so that's a good thing to think about. It's like, as things, I had this client, and she had a very hard upbringing, I would say. Not a lot of encouragement, to say the least. Let's say a fair bit of discouragement. And she had a son, and what was really interesting about her in relationship to her son is that all the things that she could have learned to do to him, given her extensive experience with being made as miserable as possible by someone who was hell-bent on bringing her to her knees, she refused to do to her son. Right? She learned the opposite lesson from all her misery and torment, which was not to move that forward down the generations. And so the idea here is that if you walk properly and aim properly and act properly, if you walk with God in this manner that we've been discussing, is that perhaps that isn't only good for you, perhaps it's also the thing that will save your family. And then by implication, perhaps save society. Because that's exactly what happens with Noah, right? First it's him and then it's his family, but everything else goes. And so by saving himself, by acting properly, and by saving his family, he actually saves the world. It's interesting, like the most profound people that I've read who've meditated deeply on the problem, say, of totalitarian catastrophe, and I would put Alexander Solzhenitsyn at the top of that list. His entire corpus, 3 volumes, 700 pages long each, in tiny type, is a long scream about the absolute necessity of individual honesty and ethical behavior as the only bulwark against totalitarian catastrophe. And I've read many writers who've attempted to diagnose the problems of the 20th century. And I think Solzhenitsyn, he came to the same conclusions that Viktor Frankl came to as a consequence of his experiences in the Nazi concentration camps. And Frankl, I'm also an admirer of Frankl, but Solzhenitsyn takes it to an entire different level of profundity and makes an extraordinarily strong case that not only do societies deteriorate because the people within the societies become individually corrupt, but that the only way to stave that off is for the individuals within that society to reject that corruption in the confines of their own personal lives. And he tells endless stories of people that he met in the gulag, in the work camps, in the death camps in the Soviet Union, of people, and this is what he learned, of people who were so incredibly tough that even under conditions, the most possible extreme conditions, there wasn't a chance that they were going to step off that straight and narrow line. There was nothing the authorities could do to move them. And just watching that was enough to transform Solzhenitsyn, because of course one of the things he wondered was, after spending a good amount of time in the work camps, was, well, just exactly how did I get here? And it wasn't, well, it was Hitler's fault and it was Stalin's fault, although it was definitely the fault of both of them. For Solzhenitsyn, it was also his fault, because he was playing the same game. He just wasn't as good at it. And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shall thou bring into the ark to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female. And so there's another message in this story, which is that it isn't only Noah and his family and human society that's dependent on Noah's appropriate actions in the world. It's the entire living planet. And in an era of excessive and extreme and genuinely disingenuous environmental catastrophizing, that's something to consider very seriously. Think, perhaps there's nothing better that you can do for everything, all things considered, including those things that are outside the confines of human society, than to get your act together and align yourself properly along all of the dimensions of your being, from the tiniest microcosm to the ultimate macrocosm. And that's the way that all of being is redeemed. That's what the story suggests. And we read it, as cynical modern people, we read it as if it was written by primitive people who thought that it was really the case that someone could build a boat and put 2 of every kind into it and thereby save the world. It's embarrassing to see things interpreted in a manner that shallow, especially by people who don't have ignorance as a justification. You know, these stories have to appeal to everyone, right? And there's lots of people in the world who aren't very bright. And so they tend to take things concretely, like a child would take things concretely if you read them a story. And this story can be taken concretely. But it has to be, because these stories have to be for everyone. But if you're sophisticated, that doesn't mean that you should dismiss it as if it's written for a child. It's maybe you have the obligation to look a bit deeper and think for a moment that it wouldn't have been conserved for these many thousands of years if there wasn't something more to it than a casual intellectual dismissal would indicate. And take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be food for thee and for them. Thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, so did he. And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee I have seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s, the male and his female, and of beasts that are clean, but not clean, by 2, the male and his female, and of fowls also of the air by 7s, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. For yet 7 days I will cause it to rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. And Noah did according unto all that the Lord commanded him. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. And Noah went in, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him into the ark, because of the waters of the flood, of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls and of everything that creepeth upon the earth. They went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark, the male and the female, as God had commanded Noah. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day, were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. In the selfsame day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, into the ark. They and every beast after his kind, and all of the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. And they went unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. That makes Noah the ultimate shepherd, right? Shepherd of all things. Tender of the garden and shepherd of all things. That's a hell of a role. And maybe that's the one that keeps you afloat during the flood. And they that went in male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased, and bare up the ark, and it was lift up above the earth, and the waters prevailed, and were increased greatly upon the earth. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beast, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man. And all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land, died. And every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the earth, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of the heaven. And they were destroyed from the earth, and Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. And God remembered Noah and every living thing, and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters receded. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained, and the waters returned from off the earth continually. And after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent forth a raven, which went to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. And he also sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him in the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand and took her and pulled her in unto him into the ark. And he stayed yet another 7 days. And again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came into him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from off the earth. And he stayed there yet another 7 days, and sent forth the dove, which returned not again unto him any more. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked up, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. And in the second month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, was the earth dried. And God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. And bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful, and multiply upon the earth. And Noah went forth, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him, every beast, creeping thing, every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth after their kinds went forth out of the ark. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Immediate return to the sacrificial motif. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and that's Noah's proper sacrifice. And the Lord said into his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing, as I have done, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. You know, I've heard commentators, David Suzuki, for example, who claim that the substructure of Western culture, in lines such as this, deliver the earth over to human beings and justify our ravaging of being. But I don't think that that's a very careful reading. And it seems to me that given such matters, given the importance of such matters, that a very close reading is actually necessary. You know, in the story of Adam and Eve, when Adam and Eve are thrown out of the garden, God tells Eve that she's going to be subordinated to her husband. He doesn't say that that's what should happen. He says that's what's going to happen. And the same thing, as far as I'm concerned, is contained in lines like this. It isn't necessarily that this is something that should happen. It's something that did happen. It's quite remarkable, you know, to think about how long ago these lines were penned. It wasn't obvious until perhaps the 1960s that we had dominated the earth so completely that its very future existence was in our hands. And that's a prophetic element of this tale. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, and upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. It's like, that's exactly right. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb I have given you all things. Have I given you all things? But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall you not eat. And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it. And at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. This is a hard section to interpret, but what it means is something like this. God describes the dominion over the planet that revivified humanity will have, and notes the power that goes along with that, and then puts a limitation on it. And the limitation is, maintain the sanctity of life despite your power. And although it's not easy to extract from the manner in which this is being translated, what God is telling Noah is that if you kill yourself, if you kill someone else, and if any animal kills a human being, that there will be a price to pay for that. So there's an opportunity, which is that the descendants of Noah can dominate the earth, but there's a moral limitation placed on that, which is nonetheless life itself is to be regarded as sanctified and sacred. Whoever sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. And you, be you fruitful and multiply. Bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein. And God spake unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, And I, behold, I establish my covenant with you, and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, of the fowl and the cattle, and of every beast of earth that is with you, for all that go out of the ark, to every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall there be any more a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass, when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the water shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And there's a negotiated agreement there of sorts, and the negotiated agreement is, as far as I can tell, to the degree that humanity agrees to act in the manner of Noah, then the threat of catastrophic destruction will remain at bay. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, This is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. This is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. So that's a good place to stop. And there's no lecture next week, by the way, because the theater was booked, so there'll be a 1-week break. And then when we get back, we'll finish the story of Noah. There's not much left of it. We'll talk about the Tower of Babel, which is a very short story, but a very, very interesting one. And then we'll move on to the story of Abraham. And so thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Now, is the person who has the notification for the meetup after this here, and do they have the notification? Okay, because if you give that to me this time, I'll remember to read it before everyone leaves. So, do you want to start?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see if the mic is working, because lots of people will listen to this question, and so,
Yes.
okay.
So you said on a recent live stream that you didn't have enough energy to answer this question, but you said it was intriguing. So I was wondering if you had the energy to answer how someone might help someone that has borderline personality disorder.
By example.
Sorry?
By example.
Give an example.
No, I don't mean that precisely. I mean that let's not take borderline personality disorder precisely as the example. Okay, I understand the question. The question to some degree is, how do you help someone that's lost? And the answer to that is, if they aren't willing to not be lost, you cannot help them. And I would also say that as a clinician. You see, I mean, it's a statement that's informed, I would say, by my mythological knowledge, but also by straight clinical wisdom, not mine particularly. I mean, one of the things that Carl Rogers pointed out was that there were necessary preconditions for entering into a therapeutic relationship. And that would be really any relationship where the mutual flourishing of the two people involved was the paramount goal. And one of the preconditions was that both people had to want that to happen. And Rogers believed he didn't know how to get the horse to drink once you had brought it to the water. And I've thought about that a lot, because when people are really lost, sometimes they're so lost that they can't be found. And I think the only thing that you can do in a situation like that is get your life together and manifest the reality of an alternative mode of being. That's what you've got. And so that's the only way I know of to solve an intractable problem. And I would say the reason that I went down that direction with regards to borderline personality disorders, because it's one of the most serious of the personality disorders, very difficult to treat. And so I'll generalize from that to situations that are very difficult to deal with. And you know, there's a statement too, and this has nothing to do with borderline personality disorder per se. There's a statement in the New Testament that's really vicious. In fact, there's a number of them, but this is a particularly vicious one. And that is, don't cast pearls before swine. And what that means is, if you're trying to help and it doesn't work, then stop helping. It's not helping, right? It may be just wasting your time. It might be making things worse. You know, if you're offering something and it's not taken, then perhaps you should be offering it somewhere else. And sometimes, if you offer a hand and the person won't take it, you have to stop offering the hand. And then what you do is you go off and you have your life. And sometimes that means in people's lives, for example, that they have to leave their family members behind. There's a scene in the New Testament, this is another very harsh scene, where Christ is walking down the road with his disciples. I hope I've got this story right, but I've got it essentially right. And his mother calls to him and says, I believe that he's supposed to come back to the home because his uncle has died and that there's going to be a funeral. And he turns to his mother and says something like, let the dead bury their dead. I'm about my Father's business. It's something like that. And you read that and you think, that should have been edited out. No, but it shouldn't have been edited out, because it's exactly right, because sometimes the thing you do is walk away because there's no other solution. And if you are trapped in pathological relationships and you see no way out of them, if someone who is sinking has their hands around your neck and is pulling you down, you're not obligated to drown with them. You know, there's a rule too, if you're a lifeguard, you know, some of you have had lifeguard training. How do you approach someone who's drowning and panicking in the water? Feet out, right, like this. It's like, I'll save you, but that doesn't mean you get to drown me while I'm doing it. And if it's you drown or both of us drown, it's you drown. And that's wisdom. That's not cruelty, right? So, yeah.
I had a couple of questions about dialogue and engaging in dialogue with people. So the first issue that I face is I have a very high need for intellectual stimulation, and I can't get that with most people. It's something like you can have a dialogue for a time, but then
it's high trait openness. Yeah.
But then they sort of run out of ideas. They can't keep up, and it sort of falls apart. And I think this is a problem that intellectuals have quite frequently, is that they sort of, once they start reading difficult and rewarding stuff, they stop wanting to talk to regular people. And I think that contributes to the disconnect that you see between intellectuals and working class people and stuff like that. And the other question I had was about...
Okay, wait, I don't know if that's a question. I mean, I believe there's a question in there, but
The question is, how should we address that? How should I address it? And is that something that can be addressed?
Well, part of the answer to that is that's what the universities were for. I mean, you know, not everybody is equipped to or interested in engaging in high-level discussion of abstract and creative ideas. You know, you hear this idea that everyone's creative. That's a lie. It's as straightforward as that. True creativity is very, very rare. And so, and if you happen to be a creative person, or if you happen to be someone who's profoundly interested in ideas, you are in a pronounced minority, just as you are if you happen to be extremely extroverted or extremely agreeable or extremely conscientious. These are minority issues, and what you do is you find like-minded people who are capable of engaging that. You know, a heavyweight weightlifter